Hello, welcome to VR Roundtable, episode 47. My name is Gary, and joining me is Anthony and Steve this week. We've got another show lined up where it's full of a few VR-related things, and we've got a little bit light on news, but we've got a few things that we want to get to before we discuss a few games. But before I get on to that, well, let me pass it over to Steve first. How are you this week?
I'm doing very good. It's another week down, getting closer to our 1 year of doing VR Roundtable.
Yeah, we're getting closer now.
About, 5 episodes out now?
Yeah. We'll get there. Anthony, how are you?
I'm good. Everything's fine over here.
A little bit hot, though, I believe.
Yeah, it's been just recently it's been like crazy humid, which normally Sacramento dry heat, but man, last couple of days it's almost like, like thunderstorm type weather, like lightning and shit.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll get onto some news in a second. Before we get onto that, I just wanted to mention, because last week we had a few comments on the show, on the YouTube show, and I just wanted to reference one comment that we had from a guy called Barry Schuler, because he was talking about, we had this discussion last week where we were doing this brief comparison over the Rift and the Vive. We touched on a few points, it wasn't like all encompassing or anything like this, but we touched on quite a few different points of the Rift and the Vive. But I wanted to just talk about what Barry Schuler said. He left quite a long comment on the video, but let me just talk about one part in particular. He said, as for Rift versus Vive comparisons, the fact you talk about looking through the Rift gap for who came in the room on your phone, etc., without mentioning how great the Vive's cell phone connection and front camera is, was a missed opportunity to put some Vive points on the board. I've had entire phone conversations mid-game in the Vive, and the camera just works. And I just wanted to talk about this because this is something that completely slipped my mind. I wish I had remembered it during that discussion last week. The Vive does have this capability where you can link it to your mobile phone and you'll get notifications, messages and phone calls that you can receive while you're in the Vive headset. And it's a great feature. I had a few problems. I haven't tried it since I first got my Vive. I set it up originally, and yeah, it didn't work too great. Sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't. So I sort of turned this feature off. But I think a lot of people do use this feature now, and I think it's got much better. Steve, I know because you commented on this as well. What did you think?
I responded to Barry, and like you, I completely forgot about the feature. And I know you're on iOS, and I know at one point last year they had to remove that feature or remove the iOS app completely for a moment of time. But even at some point, I could never get my phone and the Vive to successfully pair. I do believe it was driver issues, and honestly, I forgot about it. And I think while we should probably take some ownership of forgetting that, it's also something that I very rarely, if ever, see anybody bring up on Reddit. It is not a talked about feature very often, and maybe they've got it sorted out, and maybe it works now and is really reliable. And Barry's absolutely correct, and that we missed that opportunity to at least say, hey, this does give you some out of VR connection to the real world, literally.
Is it a feature which requires Viveport? I think I activated it through Viveport originally, and I don't have that installed anymore. But
they have the feature long before there was a Viveport. So I mean, maybe now it needs Viveport. I don't know. I would be speculating to say either way, but I do know it was a feature before there was a Viveport.
Oh, right. I'm not, well, because when you first install the Vive software, it might not be Viveport the store, but it was still the Vive software. I think it's integrated into that part of the software.
Yes, yeah, you still had to install that Vive software that most people I'm banking don't bother installing now. No. And I mean, it's not on my computer right now either. So he was nevertheless correct. And and about the front camera though, I will say that I used to use the front camera a lot, and I had to get the Initech. That's the reason why I have the Initech card that a lot of people pick up with the Rift. I had it months and months and months before I bought a Rift, and it was because of this. It was almost the same issue. In order to get 60 frames per second out of the Vive front camera while in VR, I didn't have the controller bandwidth to do it. But once I got this Initech card, it gave me the controller bandwidth, and I was able to get 60 frames per second out of the camera, and it is a good feature, and the Rift would be better off with one. I do wish it had one.
Anthony, are these any features that you use?
You know what's funny is on my Vive headset, there's a little plastic thing that is over the camera that you have to pull off. I've never used my camera ever. It still has the little thing on it. And the reason why is because way back when I was waiting for my Vive and people were getting the, you know, this is like April 2006 or whatever, or 2016, right? When the Vive first came out, people were getting them, and I didn't have my Vive yet, but you were hearing people's experiences, and people were talking about the camera, and they're like, yeah, it's probably better just to disable the camera because I'm noticing performance problems when I have the camera. And I've always been on the low end of the PC spec. So I've always just like, I've just never even considered using the camera, which is kind of dumb. I probably should screw around with it just to even, like, I've never even seen the blue Tron mode, you know, that people see. I've never even seen it.
Yeah, you ought to give it a try. It's again, like a little bit like Steve. I used to have the camera enabled, although I did turn it down to 30 frames per second in order to, because apparently this can help with tracking if you have it at 30 frames rather than 60. So I've done that, even though I didn't really have a big problem with it on 60 anyway. But now, since then, I've sort of turned it off completely, this feature. But it is a good feature. It's
Quick
just
question: have you ever tried? Because I know some people do this where they have it set where if you get to your chaperone boundary, the camera kicks on and you actually, have you ever tried that?
I tried it, but because I've got quite a small play space, it was kicking in too often. So yeah, I didn't use it. I've tried it very briefly.
I tried it too, and I ended up turning it off. It was more jarring than anything. There's nothing like facing a skeleton in Vanishing Realms and then having your complete field of view change. It was very jarring, so that feature didn't last long for me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this week, like I say, we are a little bit light on news stories. We've got a few that we want to discuss, though. So let's get straight into this first one. Now, this is interesting because we've got these unofficial hacks. Vive, for example, is one which is being developed by an independent developer, and it's been sent some controllers from Valve. So obviously, we're seeing these support from companies. It's not really sort of publicized a great deal, but we're seeing things like this where these developers are sort of getting support in a very quiet way from certain things. Like Palmer Lucky, he donated some money to CrossVR's Patreon, and now we're seeing this from Valve. They're sort of offering their support by sending CrossVR some Steam Knuckles controllers that are coming out. So this was a interesting little news story. Anthony, I'll go over to you first. What do you think of this? Are you pleased that Valve are doing this?
Yeah, well, for me, it's more of like, why are you putting all this stuff out there so early? If you're like, if they bring out the Knuckles sometime later this year, I'm cool with everything that they're doing. If they don't bring out the Knuckles later this year, I feel like maybe they're jumping the gun a little bit with this. Or maybe when they sent out all these Knuckles controllers, like there should have been some NDA type of thing where they're fanning the flames. I mean, they're talking about playing Knuckles with Lone Echo and all this stuff, and they're kind of teasing us with this, and that's great if you're going to make this product available, say this November or maybe this December, maybe even January. But if this is like a spring 2018 kind of thing, like, why are you getting everybody all juiced up? That's my only concern.
So it sounds like that you're considering that these won't come out like by the holidays, like, and neither of us know. I'm at least I haven't seen anything, but I guess up until you saying that, I just assumed that these would be out November, December, something like that. But yeah, I guess we don't truly know. What about you, Gary? Have you felt like Knuckles is that far away?
No, I was under the impression as well, like you probably towards the end of this year or maybe very early next year. I mean, I'd go as far as maybe spring next year is when we might see these things. But
to me, that feels too far away. Like I don't know. I completely just, it's a gut feeling. Like I don't know anything. But just, I felt like by the what they're throwing out there, that they're closer. Because I agree with Anthony completely. Like, if these things are still 6, 7, 8 months away, then that sucks.
I think the problem is they've got to send these things out to developers, and like Anthony says, you know, maybe they should have had an NDA, but they've got to send these things out to developers and give them time to create some content for these controllers as well. Even though presumably they're backwards compatible with everything that's the traditional Vive ones, I still think they need to give developers enough time to do this. Although the fact that they're sending this out to the developer of Revive would point to the fact that they're sooner rather than later. The Revive integration, I wouldn't imagine, would take a great deal of effort from CrossVR. Once he's sort of got used to all the systems in place, I think he could get this out pretty quick. So I would think that would speak to it being within the next few months.
You know, the developer of the Gallery episode 1, you know, they have the controller, and they were showing it working with episode 2. And that game is coming in September. And so some people, like, you know, they made the connection there and they thought, gee, I wonder if this is going to launch in September with the Gallery 2. Like, that'll be one of the first games, blah, blah, blah. But I mean, we're in August now, you know, and when you're releasing a product and it's going to be, well, I don't know exactly. See, the thing is, I don't know the past history of Valve and physical products that they've released, like the controllers. Like, how quickly did people just order those controllers online and they were shipped from Valve? Did Amazon ever get those Steam VR? Like, I don't know how they handled all that. I wasn't paying attention. I'm not really a computer gamer by trade so much. And so when the whole Steam VR controller came out, I wasn't paying attention to that. But we're now in the month of August. And if these things really are coming soon, you'd think there would be, like, we would see like a retail box for it or something. I don't know. It just, to me, I think it's kind of a long shot now, to be honest, that we're going to actually hold Knuckles controllers in our hands in the year 2017. I think it's a long shot. And I'm a little bit concerned again about like the teasing and the hyping, which is great. You got to do that, but it should only be done maybe 4 months in advance, not 7 or 8 months in advance.
What do you think of like the price of these things? Because if these are being made by Valve, they've got nothing to do with HTC as far as we know. So if they're being manufactured by Valve and they have more control over the price of these things, what do you think, Steve? What do you think of the price these will be going for?
Jeez, we have no basis. We have nothing to really draw the comparison on. And honestly, I'm not prior to VR, haven't been a console or a PC gamer either. I don't know how much a Steam controller is.
Well, the thing is, the only reason I'm asking this is because we have HTC manufacturing these Vive ones, and they're very, very expensive if you want a new Vive one. But then on the other side, Valve have got to be looking at the Oculus Touch controllers. These are relatively cheap, and I would think they're trying to aim this as being a replacement for those in a way.
I would say, as a consumer and trying to armchair analyze a market, I would hope that these things would come in at $99 for a pair. Do I think that's going to happen? No. Do I hope that they're not $199, $250? I think that would be way too high. Maybe $150 seems like a fair bet. Like, if I had to put money on it, I'd say they'll come in at $150. But it really depends. You know, Valve has enough. I feel like, I could be wrong, I didn't look these companies up, but I feel like Valve has, in terms of the health of their companies, has a little more cash on hand, maybe, that they could avoid, or they could afford to put these out with not a lot of profit margin.
Yeah. And
I think looking at the Steam controller should help. How does that compare to an Xbox One gamepad? We can look it up here. I'll try to look it up.
I think
but yeah. If that's market comparative, then I think that's a good sign that Valve will try to be competitive here with the Knuckles controllers. But I did want to touch the whole article. We're just kind of talking Knuckles in general, but I think it's very interesting that they're giving it to CrossVR, the developer of Revive, because that doesn't help them directly. I mean, they're helping enable him so that people with Lighthouse VR technology can play Oculus's games. Like, so it's a little bit like that speaks of Valve. I think it's a very good thing that they're doing it, and it shows, hey, we are a very open platform, so to speak, and we will give our Knuckles controllers to this guy who's the only thing he's going to do is help people with our product play software that comes from another ecosystem, and I think that's pretty cool.
But it does benefit them, because right now the argument that people make is, well, hey, if you buy a Rift, you get to play everything on Steam VR, but you also get these exclusives over here. And so the more that the more that Revive is like a well-known thing, it does kind of help Steam indirectly a little bit.
Yeah, that's true. It does. And yeah. What we'll do, I'll move on because we've got some other news stories. But before we get onto that, I want to break this up a little bit with some product reviews. Steve has actually received some PSVR Mantis headphones, and he put up a review on our channel yesterday, I think it was. And
very late.
Yeah. And so I just want to get into some of these opinions on these. These are the headphones that clip onto the PSVR and allow sort of integrated audio. Steve, what do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, it's exactly what they do. Actually, have them here. They clip onto the PS4 PSVR headband, very much borrowed in concept from the Rift's design, and kind of see here. For those on the audio podcast, I'm showing them here in video. But they pop out. They're integrated to the headset, to the PSVR headset. They bring a set of convenience that doesn't sound like a big deal. And this is, now I'll be clear, this is not something that you need. It's not something that anyone needs. But once you experience just being able to pop a VR headset on and not fumble around with an extra, unconnected set of headphones, it just brings a sense of ease to it. We've talked in recent episodes and talking about the Rift, how there's that whole element of having to suit up and almost being in the mood for VR. And anything that we can do to knock that down is important, and I think does present value. That said, I am lukewarm on these Mantis headphones. For two key reasons. One, and by far the biggest, is they have the cable comes out of the bottom of each earpiece, and that cable will they flip out and they're meant to kind of pop away from where you place your head. Then you stick your head in, and then they'll flip back in and sort of gently press up against your ear. All of that works great, but the cable that comes out of the bottom of the earpiece, it while you're putting the headset on, will tug on it and cause it to pop in. So in order to put the headset on, it's now a little more convoluted, and it takes just extra finagling just to get the halo around your head. And I hate that, because that's not something I experience on the Rift. And it's almost a little frustrating that they did that, because it's not something that they couldn't have solved. If they had routed the cable to come out of the top of the clip instead of the bottom, then they wouldn't have this issue. And it seems like it's either very minimal cost avoidance, or they just couldn't get the manufacturing process lined up to do it what I feel is the correct way. So that's the biggest issue. And the second issue is they weren't as loud as my Turtle Beach 350 VRs that I use on the PlayStation VR. And that's maybe not a big deal, but if you're a person that is interested in these and you really crank your headphones up while being immersed in VR, then that could be an issue there. But comfort, they're by far the most comfortable thing for PlayStation VR that I've tried. There's no, the way the halo is on that headband, it makes any headphones that you want to use kind of need to be really cupped out, and really, I guess it's depends on the shape of your head and what headphones you have available to you, and a lot of factors that are difficult to pin down and control. But these take all of that out of the equation. They're completely comfortable. I feel once I'm in it, I feel about as comfortable in them as I do in the Rift. So Bionic is the name of the company that makes them, and they make all sorts of accessories for like Xbox One stuff and PS4 stuff. So they are sort of almost like seem like a Mad Catz type company that makes accessories. So they've done good, and I do recommend them if you're using like the stock earbuds that ships with the PlayStation VR. But if you have a set of cans and you absolutely love them, you'd have to maybe try these out, try to buy them locally so that you can return them. But yeah, I'm kind of sitting in the middle. I'm not recommending them, but I'm not recommending them either. It's just kind of very lukewarm at this point for me.
Anthony, you're a PSVR owner as well. Are these something you're looking at?
Well, yeah, until I heard all of that. And then also looking at the wire. See, one of the biggest problems with the PlayStation VR headset, really, I think any VR headset, if you're going to have built-in audio, that's great. If you're not going to have built-in audio, what you should have is the audio plug itself somewhere on the actual headset itself, so that then when a third-party company makes one of these little doodads, they could have a super short cable that just goes to that little plug, and then you don't have another cable flopping around, you know, getting where your shoulders are and all that type of thing. One of the downsides of PlayStation VR, very clearly to me, and I really hope they correct this well, I'm hoping the next version doesn't even have wires, but one of the downsides for me with the PlayStation VR is the cord that comes out of the headset is this really thin cord. And then it goes to the little dongle, basically, that has like a volume up and down control, the power button, and I think a mute button, right? And then on the side of the little dongle is where you put your headphones. Yeah. And it's dangling down. And one of the things I don't like about it, though, is that cord is so thin, which is nice in some ways because you don't feel it tugging on you quite as much. But the downside is it kind of gets, like my cord anyway, it gets all tangled, wrapped around, curled all up. And then when I put my headphones thing in, then it becomes a spaghetti situation with all these wires. And having the Oculus Rift, though, I mean, exactly what Steve says, I agree completely that once you get used to just having the headphones just be there, it really, you then notice all the extra drama that you're going through with these other headsets and grabbing it, like trying to hold the headphones, put your headset on, you know, get your headphones on without it. Because if they drop all the way to the ground, now the cord's pulling on your head. We all know this. We've done it a million times. And it is beautiful to just put on the headset and that's it. It's a one-time deal. So yeah.
It's definitely what I had hoped out of these Bionic Mantis headphones, and I think I'm maybe going to keep them. I'm not going to return them because I do like the comfort. Once you're in, it's not an issue, and I think I made it sound very dramatic to get into it. It's maybe still a bit easier than having to put the PSVR headset on and fumble around with an extra set of cans. So it's still easier than that. It's just, I think coming from the Rift, have a little bit of extra frustration because I realize how much better it could have been if they had taken a little more effort in the design process, or maybe they did. You know, I don't want to harp on their engineers and designers. Maybe they realized this problem like I did, but the powers that be wouldn't let them actually manufacture it that way. So some of my frustration is from that angle, knowing how good they could have been. But overall, it is a improvement over fumbling around with an extra set of headphones and dealing with all that. So in that sense, I do recommend it.
I think because just before the show, you were showing me, Steve, what it looks like, you know, when you're putting this headset on with the Mantis headphones attached, and it does look like you've got so many wires coming down.
Like I'm showing it again now. So yeah, as you can see, there's a lot of wires, and now I have to figure out how to stick my face basically in that opening. So it's a little bit of a pain. And if they had just routed the cable like a port to where it comes out of the top, it wouldn't tug on that any, and this would work so much better. So still, hopefully maybe Bionic sees this and makes a version 2, or someone else, a competitor, sees it and makes a version 2, because I think there's a market for this. And we've seen it with the Vive. The deluxe audio strap is something that I don't know how many they've sold relative to you know, what their attach ratio is with the Vive headset itself, but I imagine it's something that damn near every Vive owner would say they would like to have. You know, maybe if the price was a little bit cheaper, they'd jump on it. So there's certainly a market for these types of things.
Yeah, I think having used the Rift for a couple of weeks now, and it is good having the integrated audio. I've got to say though, with the Vive, I use this technique that a few people do, where they route the earbuds down so they just dangle down. So I just put on the headset, and then I can just put the earbuds in, and it's relatively straightforward to me. The advantage of the audio head strap isn't really for the audio. The deluxe audio head strap, I should say, isn't really for the audio part. I want a better level of comfort for my Vive, really. I don't know. I know people use these earbuds, and some people prefer it that way, and some people prefer having separate headphones. I think both of you guys, you use separate headphones with the Vive. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't use earbuds. I actually use I'll use my Sony Golds usually with the Vive, because that's one thing the Vive does right is that the stock Vive, that very thin Velcro strap. For all the downsides it has, the one upside is that it doesn't, like, you can just place a set of headphones on your ears with nothing pressing. With the thick PSVR headband, whatever you have to do has to kind of get under there, and it like presses on my ear weird. And after 30 minutes, 45 minutes or so, I feel a little bit of pressure on my head. So these Mantis has completely solved that. So I'm definitely keeping them for that reason. But so that's one plus for the Vive. I think going forward, hopefully the Rift, then Oculus has demonstrated that any sort of premium high-level VR should have an integrated audio solution, or offer a standalone product or something where you can get to a great place without having to buy these aftermarket bolt-ons and cobble something together just to get a little bit of comfort.
Yeah. Okay. On to the next section now. We've got some news out of, because people are starting to get these Windows mixed reality headsets. I think it's the HP that people are receiving at the moment. I don't know. Is there? Sorry, I should have looked this up. Is there an Acer headset people receiving as well?
Yeah. So the HP is the one that looks like RoboCop. What everyone's saying, it makes it look like RoboCop when you're wearing it. And I'm pretty sure the blue one that you're seeing is the Acer.
That's right. Yeah.
So there's two of them that I've seen people take receipt on.
Yeah, so both of these headsets, they've got a very similar specs, really, almost identical. They've both got 1440 by 1440 resolution for each eye. They've got two separate screens of 2.89 inches, two cameras that are facing outwards, which do the positional tracking. And when they are going to ship these motion controllers as well, these cameras will also track the motion controllers. They've got a 95-degree horizontal field of view, 90 hertz refresh rate. They use a single cable similar to the Rift, where you've got HDMI and USB connectivity in this one cable. It's only 4 meters long though. And these headsets, they do look good, and they've got the slightly higher resolution. Some of the comments that are coming out from people that have actually tried these now tends to be revolving around how good the tracking works. At least from the ones that I've seen, they say it's surprising how well the inside out tracking works with these. And I'm more interested to see how well it works with these motion controllers whenever they get released. That's really the box that I think needs to be ticked in order to get these to compete with the Rift and the Vive, because it's so important in certain experiences to have your hands in VR, and I think that will be the test really when these come out. Anthony, what do you think of these? Have you seen any reports on these headsets?
Yeah, I've seen the reviews of the Acer one. One guy, a developer in Seattle, you guys might have seen this one. I don't remember the guy's name, but he had the Acer and did a pretty good review of it. Like, he's tried like every headset there is. He's developing games in VR, and he was saying it's really good, but then he did this thing where he was shaking his head, and then the headset was kind of flopping around. And so he was like, I don't know that this is going to work for gaming, because if you swing your head, the headset, this was the Acer, which supposedly is maybe a little bit more flimsy than the HP. I think there's like a $30 difference between the two. And what I understand is the band has more padding on the HP. It's supposed to be a little bit comfier than the Acer. But other than that, these are reference designs. They're basically going to be identical. And the 1440 by 1440, that resolution people are saying that the text is clear. If you're looking at text in the center of the screen, it's a lot sharper than it is maybe on the Vive and Rift. And the biggest deal with this, of course, though, is what about the games? Are there going to be games? How is the games going to work? And then, well, actually, another sidebar issue, though, too, is like, am I the only one that's been kind of confused by consumer version and developer version? And like I remember reading a story, now this is months ago, but I remember reading a story that the first consumer version was going to be Lenovo in mid-August. Upload had a story, like they talked about like the consumer version is coming mid-August, but now everybody, that seems to have flown completely out of the window. And now, no, that must be a mistake. It's just the developer version. When does this actually come to consumers? Like, I don't know. It's a little bit weird.
No. I mean, you're right. I do remember that being established that, hey, these headsets are releasing, and particularly I can't talk today, the Lenovo unit this August, and here we are. It's not mid-August yet, so there's opportunity for it to still come true. But yeah, it's developer. In these reviews, the people are saying that, hey, this is just a box and a headset showing up in a box with a power supply and nothing else. It's completely not consumer. But I think it's good that have these reports so we kind of start getting a feeling of how these products are working. There's so much to still answer, and as of right now, and this is just right now, when you're in these Microsoft headsets and you're in the environment that they place you in, you can move all the windows around, and you can put your apps and position them. It comes off very much being like big screen beta or something like that, where you can just have multiple windows and multiple apps doing things. But one key point is that for the time being, it only works with apps that come from the Windows Store. And so that means any official Windows app, like we're using Chrome right now and Google Hangouts, we couldn't have these windows open if we had this Microsoft headset sitting on our heads right now. I really hope that changes. I would have to assume at this point, if I was a betting man, that would change. But maybe it won't initially, and maybe Microsoft wants to push these out where you're buying products through their store. We've talked about how all of this stuff is an arms race to everybody's respective ecosystem. And if that's the case, I'd call these Microsoft units dead on arrival. Like, I can't see gamers moving in troves, even people in enterprise and in business use. They're going to have their AutoCADs, and I'm assuming that's not available on the Microsoft Store. I didn't check, but they're going to have software and things that they don't buy through the Windows Store that they want to use. So that's a big thing to keep the eye on. As Gary mentioned, how well it tracks with motion controllers is something to keep your eye on. But as of now, our first sort of field test on inside out tracking is so far appears to be positive, and that's the thing that has me the most excited, is the inside out tracking, because that, I think that combined with price is one of the things that's going to take VR mainstream, where someone can just, if I have to travel for work, I can throw it in my luggage and get into the hotel and it just works.
I agree.
That's going to be so big.
I think inside out tracking is a great way to go going forward. I was speaking about the Rift last week, and I was mentioning how inelegant setting up these sensors all around your room is in terms of having these cables going around. So if we can get to a stable inside out tracking solution, that would be fantastic. And I was thinking about this as well. It has two front-facing cameras. I don't know if they actually face directly front or if they're off slanted slightly. I think they're slanted slightly in order to get a wider field of view. And these will track not only the inside-out tracking for the headset, but they'll also track the motion controllers as well when they're released. And when the motion controller is out of view of these cameras, then it relies on the IMUs that are internal to the motion controllers in order to detect where it is. And it can only give a rough approximation at that point. What I was thinking is, they've got two cameras that are facing diagonally out forwards. Could they have two cameras on the back facing diagonally out backwards in order to track them where they're out of view and have sort of 360 coverage of this inside out tracking? I guess there's restrictions on bandwidth of the USB connection that could prevent that, but
yeah, that for sure. But I'd say one of the counter arguments is that when your hand in the controller is out of view, it doesn't need to be super accurate, so long as it doesn't do the kind of float off into outer space thing. So what if it's off by, I don't know, half an inch or something? Yeah. From what I gather, the IMU in most of these motion controllers are doing more than we think they are. The IMUs as a standalone device are pretty impressive, and they update at a faster rate. A lot of times they're doing all that heavy lifting between, for example, the Lighthouse, each scan is 120 hertz. But the vertical scan and the horizontal scan together, and that's when the positional tracking is updated, is double that. So it's 60 frames per second, 60 hertz that you're getting updated from the Lighthouses. But most of these games are running 90 frames a second, or at least that's what we're aiming for. The IMU, it's certainly not enough by itself, or else we would just have IMUs. But it does more than I think most people realize, and that's my point. And I think a good IMU and good sensors in the controllers, and the fact that when they're out of your field of view, that their accuracy may not have to be very precise, so long as they don't float away, I think that'll be good enough.
I'm not convinced by that. I think having that extra for certain things, I mean, just taking an example like Space Pirate Trainer or something like that, or whatever, you can be shooting in two separate directions. Generally you'll be looking where you're shooting, but if you're not, I'd like that. And also there's other things that could come about where you'd need this extra level of tracking. In order to just sort of put my mind at ease, to say that it has this 360-degree tracking around you and it is going to be accurate no matter, even if it is out of view of the front cameras, I think that would be a great step forward. And I don't see any reason. Obviously you've got the added cost of these sensors and the extra bandwidth in the USB. If they can get around those problems, I don't see a big problem with doing this. But yeah, so
I'm sure
I would take it. If they do it, I'll take it. Go ahead. Sorry.
They probably have like an inverse kinematic algorithm as well, where they know that your hand was right here, and then they lose your hand for a split second, but just based on human anatomy, they can probably, and the IMU combined with that, I'm pretty sure they can probably predict it accurate enough, unless you have like really long arms or something kind of abnormal about you. It probably will track it relatively well.
I think it will do a relatively good job. It's just that when these were announced, these controllers, and people were saying they're being tracked by these internal cameras that are pointing out, one of the main concerns that everybody was bringing up is just how well it's going to track when they're not in the range of these cameras. And I think it's an important question, to be honest, because even if it puts your mind at ease that where your hand is, it is being tracked, and it's not an approximation that isn't quite up to the standard as when you've got your hands in front of you. I think that'll help, and we've got experiences that might be coming out that we don't know about yet that might rely on this kind of stuff a little bit more.
I was going to put you on the spot and say, other than Space Pirate Trainer, can you name a bunch of games where you think that would be a major issue with?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. You are putting me on the spot, but what I was thinking as well, if you're playing something like, say, and I'm talking about games here, there's a lot of other applications that might come out with these headsets, but I'm thinking, say, in a Vanishing Realms type game where you're blocking an attack from the front with a shield and you sort of swing into an enemy behind you, something like this. Anything, there's so many applications where we want to get it as close in virtual reality as we do in real life. So if I feel like my movements outside are not being closely matched, I guess it's more to do with my own impressions of how well this stuff works. I don't want to rely on IMUs. I want to rely on more like sensor-based tracking?
It's my understanding that the IMU would be accurate enough for what you described. Now, I don't know if, you know, like a game like Arizona Sunshine, where the aiming, you had to be very precise. And like just the slightest tilting of your wrist, what felt like a millimeter was the difference between a headshot or a complete miss. It maybe is an issue for that. But I think like Lone Echo, for example, Lone Echo had a lot of things where you would grab an object and maybe look this way while you're holding a lever or something. I think it's going to be accurate enough that that's not going to matter. And then plus, if you staying with the Lone Echo example, they had a way of like when you grabbed an object and let's say you're pulling like when you're recharging your shield that blocked the radioactive shield, you pulled the little plunger type thing out and you saw your hand stayed on the object, your actual in-game hand. But then you saw the phantom, where your hand was being tracked, and that's how they got around, you know, pulling on objects that had a limited range of motion, where your actual live hand could extend past that range of motion. So I think there are ways to do it, and regardless, you know, we may disagree a little bit on what we think is acceptable right now, but there's a lot of information still to come out on these. And I think it's incredibly fascinating. And I think this is one of the biggest discussions in VR right now is the whole tracking thing. That's like what people put their purchase decisions on is the tracking system.
Well, PSVR, for example, that gets a lot of stick from the tracking on the motion controllers. But yeah, I think it is important. Tracking is important. And I've mentioned it, you know, I believe that in my particular play space, unless you've got a really big play space, the Rift and the Vive are almost identical from my usage at the moment with 3 sensors for the Rift. So I think it is important. I've not used the PSVR tracking, the Move controllers. So I don't know, you know, you guys have used these things and maybe it's not a big issue. I hear this brought up time and again, though, how poor the tracking is on these controllers.
You have to keep in mind the controllers are so old. I'm not even sure they even have an IMU and they're not using some 7-year-old gyroscope technology. So I think some of that tracking stems from the Move controller literally being, I'd have to go check, but yeah, I mean, those things are what, 7, 8 years old now, at least going back to development. So the actual tracking system based components in them are also dated. I think if you had a updated chipset, I think we'd have better tracking, still using the PlayStation's existing camera and everything else being the same.
Yeah,
but I don't know. I'm just throwing out my hunches.
Well, we'll see how these work anyway. I'm sure we'll get to try these motion controllers with the Windows mixed reality headsets at some point. Anyway, let's go on to the next news story that we've got down here, and this is Lone Echo and Echo Arena, currently the top 2 entries on Metacritic for PC game new releases. So, well, let me go over to Anthony. You know, we've played Lone Echo, we've played Echo Arena. I think Lone Echo, the single player game, it's such a fantastic game. I enjoyed every moment of that. But Anthony, what do you think of this news that it's getting so much publicity on Metacritic?
You know, I haven't read too much about this, but what I did read about, kind of related, is IGN actually did a review for Lone Echo based on demand from their users, like saying, can you please freaking review this game? So that's good news that they actually did a review for it. But yeah, I don't know that I put a ton of stock into this Metacritic thing, because obviously these games were going to get really high scores because they're kind of the shining example for VR right now. So they're going to get the high scores, and I wonder how many different review sites Metacritic is using for their VR reviews. But you'd have to imagine that most of the people doing VR reviews are going to give Lone Echo and Echo Arena really high scores. So it probably kind of artificially inflates them a little bit. But I mean, hey, it's good to see them on that list. And eventually we're going to stop with the whole VR flat thing and they just all become games. And that'll be good. But
Well, it's basically, I mean, that's what this list is done. This isn't a VR category. This is just within all recent releases of PC games. And it's weird because honestly, I've not spent a lot of time on Metacritic. I don't really buy into that whole hoopla and stuff a whole lot. But I did go there to their website for this, and what I noticed is that the quote unquote new releases are going back to at least May. So this isn't like this is just this week's releases or the last 2 weeks. This is new is a couple months. And for it to be the top 2 games either suggests that everyone that's reviewed it has regardless of where Metacritic is pulling the reviews from, has absolutely adored it. And that for it to be the top 2 slots, you know, because they broke out the Lone Echo and the Echo Arena, I think it's a pretty good blurb, because there's been a lot of attention with Lone Echo. IGN was called out, and IGN actually responded in one of their latest, I don't know if it was the most recent or the one before, of the Game Scoop podcast. They had they took feedback, reader mail, and someone asked them this, like, what's up guys, why aren't you doing VR coverage? And basically they gave the answer that we talked about previously from CNET and GameSpot, but they said the same thing. It just doesn't get enough traffic for us. We're having to manage that. And it wasn't but a couple days after that their Lone Echo review came out, and they also gave it an 8.9. So hopefully Metacritic isn't just using the one IGN score. I only realize that as a possibility now as I am saying it.
No, they're not. They're not.
Okay, good.
It's got 7 critic reviews on Metacritic at the moment. Lone Echo has. Yeah, so we've got a few 90s on there, an 85 from Upload VR, the 89 from IGN. But as well, just getting onto that, because you did mention this Game Scoop podcast, and Dan Stapleton, who reviewed Lone Echo, he also reviewed Superhot, and IGN gave Superhot 9.0 as well. So they're getting some, I mean, these are 2 shining examples of VR games, and it's just good that they are getting this kind of stuff out there. But like you said, Steve, you know, Dan Stapleton in particular, he was talking about this on this Game Scoop podcast, and he was saying, you know, yeah, it does come down to traffic to some extent, but he was saying there's so many games out there that they need to review. And if we focus on a VR game, that's something else that is being left behind. And that could be a game that a lot more people will be interested in. I can understand this, you know, people can have a go at IGN and GameSpot and these big sites, and it does come down to the level of interest in all of this stuff that they have to run their business on. It's frustrating as a VR gamer, VR user, when they do ignore this, but I can't necessarily blame IGN for going after this.
I can blame them. I can blame them because, I mean, come on, they could hire one person that just specializes in nothing but VR. They just get one guy and they say, you're our VR guy. You're going to play PlayStation VR games. You're going to play Rift games, Vive games. And if you feel the game is big enough, you review it, you know, and there should be a review for Superhot and Lone Echo and maybe Archangel and some of the big ones, you know, that are coming out. What's one employee? Come on. Yeah, they might not be getting the clicks, but wait a minute. You're a video game company. You're supposed to cover this industry. I think that's bullshit.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I agree. Yeah, sorry, Steve. Just quickly, I do agree with you from a certain point of view. What I will say is, one employee, if they're not gaining enough clicks to pay the wage of that, the salary of that one employee, then that's probably what they're looking at. And I don't know. I don't know the numbers
IGN
involved.
is not a little freaking indie website that's run by a couple of people. This is a major corporation. You freaking sometimes. Just like the VR companies, you think all these VR companies are making millions upon millions? No, they're investing in the future. And IGN should be investing in the future as well. Like, okay, if they don't cover VR at all, their lunch is going to get 8 in 5 years when everything moves to VR and people just forget about IGN because they've decided to go to some other place. It's a bad idea.
So, see, that's where I agree with what you're saying in spirit, but in what's going to happen, we're covering VR. VR Roundtable is covering VR. Well, what happens 3 years from now when IGN and GameSpot decide to get serious? They're going to take all the traffic. They're not going to be behind we are. They're not going to be behind us.
Oh, they will. No.
But you see what I'm saying? As by being the big conglomerate companies that they are, they're just going to, at least in terms of media. Now, in terms of game development and the investments that Valve and Oculus and all these other companies are making, you are 100% right. But in terms of just press coverage, they can flip a switch. And they're going to carry all their weight's going to come with them. Where I stand is, why do we care? Why does the average VR enthusiast right now, why do they give a shit whether or not IGN is covering this? And I would argue that I think the biggest reason is that it's a validation. If IGN and GameSpot and all the major media outlets are covering it, I have validated my purchases of VR. I have validated it as a popular medium.
No,
beyond that, like, do you, like, I don't know, maybe I'm speaking personally, but I really don't care. Like, it seems to me like the people from IGN and those type of places are a little bit out of touch anyway with what makes a good game. Like, you get a much better pulse on the quality of a game by going to a place like Reddit or other message boards and getting, you know, the quick feedback from 30 people. Rush of Blood is a perfect example. Alana, or whatever her name is at IGN, she was like, Rush of Blood's not very good, blah, 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 blah. And to this day, Rush of Blood is still one of my favorite VR games.
It's publicity though as well. This is the thing, and it's safeguarding the future of VR. I think that's the big thing. It's not just validation. I do agree with you on that point, but I think it's when we see sites like IGN covering VR, it's getting more publicity out there for VR, and it's making not just consumers sit up and notice, it's making developers sit up and notice. And I think it's a circular thing. You know, we need developers, we need consumers to do all of these things. And while I agree that IGN should be looking towards the future to do this stuff, I think it's more difficult in practice because they could be safeguarding their future by covering VR now, but at the same time they have to justify the costs that are going into that to the people that own IGN and probably don't care. They don't care at all about whether this is the future or not. They're looking at the here and now, and they're probably not looking towards the future. I agree. I think it's a mistake and they should cover this stuff, but at the moment it's probably not easy for them to justify it in some ways.
Just to answer Steve's query about why do you care, it's like if you're a podcast fan and you've always listened to this podcast and that podcast and that podcast, and then you decide to buy a Vive or a Rift or whatever, you kind of think, you listen to some of these podcasts and they don't mention it whatsoever. You kind of feel like, wait a minute, like what? I'm like off in my own little corner over here. What happened? So people want these major sites. I mean, that's why they care. They want to feel like they're part of the overall general gaming conversation.
Yeah, that's completely what I meant by the validation. It validates the medium. It says, okay, this is a legit thing because the major outlets are talking about it. It's getting clicks. You know, each of these reviews are being seen by 83,000 people, and it's got, you know, 2,000 comments on the Facebook post, whatever. Like that's what I meant by the validation of it. And yeah, I'll have to say, as a consumer that's made a lot of personal investment into it, I would love to see that validation. I would love to see the medium become more mainstream. But I'm just not sure that from an actual, outside of that, from an actual like content perspective, I'm not sure that's a place someone needs to go to get their impressions on a game or any kind of authority. Like, these people at IGN are no more authoritative on what makes a good game or what makes a good product than any of us are. So that's the part that I find interesting, that why people were kind of clamor for that.
But I think there is a perception that from some people that they are more authoritative on certain aspects, and by having VR shown to those people in that context could have an impact on them purchasing it or not purchasing it. But yeah, anyway, I think that's pretty much all the news we've got this week. Some news and topics there. Has anybody else got anything they want to add at this stage before we get onto some games?
I'll mention just one little thing. It's kind of related to what we were just talking about. There was a news blurb that came out that the developer of that game Enslaved and like the Devil May Cry remake, what's that developer? They're Ninja Theory, right? Ninja Theory?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Ninja Theory, they came out and said VR is the future, like straight up. VR is the future. And they're not working on any VR games. They just said, we know that VR is the future. And this little news story came out. And I just thought this kind of a news story is good, for, especially for like the NeoGAF crowd and stuff, because there's a lot of people on those kinds of forums and stuff where they are just like, they're so locked into this video game culture and like all these different developers that are doing all these flat games and stuff. And they're kind of like, they kind of have their blinders on and they're like in this flat game world. And this kind of news announcement comes out and it's almost like a little slap, like wake up, like, hey, there is this VR thing and it is going to affect you eventually. And this is kind of a wake up call to some of these people that are locked in their little flat game world. And I think we're going to hear more and more about this as it goes on, because more and more developers, they're going to want to do this. Like, even if some of the companies that are funding it, like, I don't see a lot of money in VR, it doesn't matter. These developers are going to want to pursue this. And it's good to see a story like that.
Yeah, I saw that too, and it was a good story to come out of. We see sometimes stories coming out from developers who are commenting on VR, even though they're not directly actively making anything in VR at the moment. And it's just little things that there seems to be a slight change of the tide at the moment, where
although there was another little story, Strauss Zelnick, the Take-Two guy, for Grand Theft Auto and all those games, he once again was saying that he believes AR is there's a future in AR, but he's not really a VR guy. So anybody that's like hoping for Grand Theft Auto VR officially, it's going to be a long wait for that one.
Yeah, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing either, though. You know, AR or VR, that's okay by me. So
I think both push the industry forward. For AR to take off, it's going to have to answer a lot of the questions and solve a lot of the solutions that VR has to answer. So fine, let them make an AR product and further the field.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's get on to some games that we've been playing. Anthony, I'll go over to you first. What have you been playing this week?
Yeah, so the only game I've really played this week that's new is Gunheart. And this game came out, was it like a week ago or so that it came out? We ended up getting a key for this game, but we were actually a little bit late to the party, so to speak. But Gunheart was this huge game that we've kind of been looking at as a coming soon game, like, oh, this is going to be a big game, because when it was first announced, you heard that there was some Robo Recall developers, like some people that used to work for Epic Games that worked on the Bullet Train demo, and then they maybe worked on Robo Recall for a period of time. They left and went to Drifter Entertainment. Also, some people that were involved in HoloLens for Microsoft also came over to Drifter Entertainment. So they have this pedigree of some pretty prime time developers. I believe they're based in the Seattle area, and there's kind of a lot of cross-pollination that goes on up there. But this was supposedly going to be one of these big games, and it kind of just came out of the blue. Like, nobody was like, we didn't know that it's coming out on such and such a date. And then all of a sudden on July 31st, bam, it's like, Gunheart is out, everybody. And so got a little bit caught off guard, but we ended up getting a code thanks to Drifter Entertainment, and I was able to try the game out. And man, it's weird. I have mixed emotions on this game because I'm not a multiplayer guy. I've said it a million times. I don't think any of us are really that hardcore into multiplayer. We probably should have one person on our show that is like a multiplayer junkie, just to kind of represent that. But the thing about Gunheart is it doesn't really have a traditional single player mode. The way it works is you go to this lobby. A lot of people kind of describe it like Destiny. And it's kind of like you go to this shared lobby and you see other players there and you see them moving around, and it has the name above the different players and you can hear their voice chat and all that. And there's different sections that you can go to. There's a section where you can like try to buy different guns. There's a section where you're like upgrading shields, or you're changing maybe your appearance a little bit. And then there's a section where it's like, these are the job posting, like these are the missions that you go on. And so you go to the mission area and you choose a mission, and sometimes you're like joining a mission, and there's other people that are already in there and you're playing with them. Or you start a mission and you might start off and you might be the only person in there, and then all of a sudden 2 other guys come in. So it's kind of like this drop in, drop out multiplayer. I'm not sure exactly how many people can be in it at the same time. I know at least 3. I've been in there with at least 2 other people. And my experience with the game has varied dramatically based on whether or not I had additional people with me or I was alone. And then also just kind of like the attitude and like the general vibe of kind of the other players that you're with. And I mean, this is the same for basically any multiplayer game out there. Echo Arena has a lot of this as well. If you're paired up with friendly people, it can be this magical, amazing experience. If you're paired up with a couple of ass wipes, you know, it can be a real nightmare. And it's like, oh God, what am I doing here? So it's interesting from that standpoint. What I can say though is one night I was playing and it was 10:30 p.m. Pacific time. I was up kind of late, 11 p.m. I was still playing, right? And no one was around. And so I was in this game, and it basically became a single player game because nobody was there and nobody joined me. And as I was going through this adventure, the game is like you're on like an alien planet, and there's like bug creatures that you're battling, all different kinds of bugs. There's like eggs that hatch and they turn into like these little fly creatures. There's little buzzing things flying around. And then there's like these other kind of ant looking guys that are taller. And so you have these different enemies kind of on an alien planet type thing. But what was interesting to me was I got like this Halo vibe from the game to some degree, which probably doesn't make much sense. But I don't know. For some reason, I was in there and it's like, I don't know why, but I'm getting like a Halo vibe from this game. And
well, it's compared, like you said before, it's compared with Destiny, and I guess, you know, Halo and Destiny, they're so closely related in some ways that I can understand that as well, the Halo connection.
Well, sometimes you're in these like because the game is like outdoors and indoors. So you're like outdoors in these canyons and you're jumping from platform to platform. And then you go inside these like tunnels where there's like rooms and stuff. And it was like when I was in the rooms, just like the walls, just everything, I don't know. It just gave me this like, the last Halo I really played was Halo 3. So I'm like way behind the time on Halo. But for some reason, I just got a little bit of a Halo. There's something about the hallways or the walls. There is a shimmering in this game that is very similar to raw data before they updated raw data and got rid of a lot of the shimmering. And I believe this is related to the Unreal Engine and whether they're using the forward rendering or the other rendering. The forward rendering is the new method that basically takes away a lot of the shimmering. So this one is using the old method, I suppose. But I enjoyed my experience for the most part. I thought the graphics were good. The guns kind of sound a little bit like pea shooters. That I kind of wish the guns had a little more oomph to them. But sometimes I also think that developers may have made the game like that, and then you get sick of hearing your guns go, you know what I mean? Like you're in the game constantly shooting. Like it might. Sometimes when I have that criticism where it's like the guns don't have much oomph, it's like, well, maybe if they did have oomph, you'd be freaking sick of it after a couple of hours.
Some of that though may be, and this is one of the issues. I'm not gonna say issue, just one of the minor quibbles of the game is that the hits, and I don't have a deep server client experience, but basically some of the hit detection is being registered server side. And how that feels, there's an element of, for lack of a better word, lag and maybe that's the correct word to really use here, but the actual shooting and what is being done client side, which is there on your machine, versus what's being done on server side, gives it a little bit of a floaty disconnect. And I definitely picked up on that. It felt like it almost feels like you're shooting Nerf darts or something, instead of like instantly traveling at the speed of sound or whatever, bullets. And yeah, that I think that for me is why I have that feeling of it. But the game as a whole, I'll pretty much just echo everything you said. It is Destiny in VR that is maybe a little less fleshed out than actual Destiny is. The whole operation and everything, the way the game works is very similar to Destiny. It's you're in this online world from the very first second you boot the game. You're just there. And in my very first time playing the game, it goes through the splash screen, the logos and all that crap. And then when I was in game, I had someone like 4 inches from my face. It just happened to be where I spawned and where they were, and it was like, what? And this person is talking, and I was like, okay, I didn't click multiplayer. I'm just in it. There's no going into multiplayer. It's just there and ever present. Overall, I think it's a good game. Within the industry, I'm a little let down, not by the game itself, but because I'd hoped that this was a polished, finished title, and instead it's an early access title, and there's a lot of work still to be done on it. It's going to be this constantly evolving thing. When I first saw the trailer for it, I thought it was this mostly finished title that we were just going to buy, and early access wasn't a component of it, and that you would just get to enjoy it for the experience it was at this point in time. It is a meteor experience. I think this is something that maybe 6 months from now is like raw data, is totally different and more fleshed out than it currently is. So we'll have to see how that goes. And the only other thing I'll add is in watching the trailer, I thought the game visually was going to be just incredible and mind-blowing. But actually in the game, and it doesn't look bad by any stretch. It's a very good looking game, but I felt like it doesn't feel in VR the way I thought it was going to feel visually looking at the trailer. I just thought this had the opportunity of being like one of the best looking games, if not the best looking game. And there's something missing, and it may be what you mentioned, Anthony, the deferred rendering versus the forward rendering. And I don't know what all the latest titles like Lone Echo, I don't know what method they use. They haven't really said as far as I know. So it looked just a little softer. There was a little something to it that I didn't like the way it ended up being visually. But all in all, it's a good game, and I think it's something you can get a lot of hours out of. Going through and replaying the missions and upgrading. That does remind me, though, one last thing, and I'll send it to you, Gary, is nothing felt challenging, like too overly challenging. I played the first 3 missions in order, and then I skipped to like maybe I want to say further down, second to last, that at least that it would let me choose. I forgot what the name of the mission is. It was in the other world, though. You have the homestead, I think, is the first world, and then you have the other one, the hive, something to that effect. And I played a mission very far down in it, and was paired up with a couple people, and we just blew through it. Like, it was at no point did I feel like stressed or like we didn't have the resources we need. It almost felt like a gallery shooter in that sense, that I felt overpowered. And I don't know if they have some balancing they need to sort out to make it feel like more of a challenge.
Well, yeah, I mean, similar to you guys, really, I won't stay on this, but one of my main reservations about this game is just the multiplayer integration for me, because I'm not used to playing games like that where you don't have a separate multiplayer mode. And maybe it's just something I need to get used to with this type of game. I haven't played Destiny, and I don't know if this works in exactly that way or not, but just having the option to play through some missions in a solo way would be preferable to me. Having said that, you know, I went in and I was paired up with somebody, and it was pretty good. I was enjoying myself. I wouldn't say that it was a disaster or anything like that. And just to reference your point on the graphics, Steve, I think these graphics were really, really good, actually. And I like, in particular, something that's always impressive in VR is the sense of scale. And when you look up and you see these sort of huge enemies, I think it has an impact on you when you're playing these VR games. And that was something that stuck out to me.
The alien blob that shoots the lasers at you from above, that thing does look good. And it's not, I can see that the assets and everything all look good. It's just, it wasn't quite as sharp or something as what I hoped. There was something missing, but I could tell overall what was underneath it was a very good looking game with very good looking assets. It was just something didn't seem quite right in execution.
Yeah.
But you know, it's just an issue. And I'm pretty sure, about 99% sure, that when you go to the area where you launch a mission, that you can set it to start new. And set it to where no one can join, and then when you launch it, you're basically playing it single player.
Oh, okay. I'll have to
you'll start from the beginning, and that's another gripe I'll say. It reminds me, there's a lot of times I joined a mission, which I get. You know, you join a mission, you're joining it in progress, so it may not be in the beginning, but then it puts you, like, it physically places you, from what I could tell, at the beginning of the mission. So if whomever you're joining, whatever room, if they're, say, halfway through the mission, you got to just go through this teleport frenzy to catch up to them. I don't know why it wouldn't just let you join, like, within so many feet or whatever from the nearest player or from the host or something like that. Me having to teleport, you know, 89 times and spend 2.5 minutes just to traverse the landscape they've already cleared out just to catch up with the other two people. That seems like it shouldn't be that way. And hopefully that's just a bug or something they haven't figured out how to do, but and it's not just the way they've designed it. But that aggravated me a few times.
Mm-hmm. Well, talking about a sense of scaling games, that can lead me on to the other game that I've played this week. Actually, I've played another two, but I know, Steve, we can both talk about the final one. But I also played The Ranger Lost Tribe, and this is from the makers of Deadly Hunter, which was a sort of a bow and arrow type game where you're shooting off waves of enemies. It was a particularly well done one, though, I think. The character models are very good. You know, the graphics are really good as well. But The Ranger Lost Tribe, it's sort of stepping it up. I feel like it's the developers have gone to the next level in this, and it's a really, really good game. I mean, at the moment it's sort of early, but it's still good what's there at the moment. And the scale, again, in this game, graphics are very good, but the scale of the world around you is something that struck me. You're going through these sort of rocky environments, really, that open out in sections, and they have, it's the sense of scale where you have these distant environments that still don't look like a skybox or anything like that. You know, I think that's the most impressive point. You can have a sense of scale where things in the distance just look like a skybox, but when you've got it done in a realistic way, it can have an impact. So The Ranger is this game where you can choose various different weapons. You know, you've got a sword and shield, as we used to, and you go through, it's got a variety of locomotion methods. Again, a good thing. You've got teleport or free roam, and you can go through and you're just battling waves of enemies. It's got a sort of a stealth option in this. If you use the teleport locomotion method, you can actually teleport behind enemies, and this is actually a game mechanic that is built in, and it gives you a brief tutorial of how to do this. But you can teleport behind an enemy and do a stealth attack, an assassination. So I think that's all good, and it's adding in a few new game mechanics into these types of games. Works really well. Again, like I say, the graphics are very good. Performance is very good as well. But I did notice that some of the worlds, as you're progressing through, there's a little bit of pop in. And I've seen this on some other games. I'm just trying to think actually, but this one, it struck me probably the most in any VR game that I've played so far. And it's just how the world pops in as you progress through. You see these huge structures that will suddenly appear. So I didn't like that too much. There's also the combat itself, the sword mechanics. I know that you guys were talking about this a few weeks ago in Carnage Chronicles, how the combat didn't particularly feel very satisfying. And I get that impression from this game as well. It's not really that satisfying to do the actual swinging of the sword and hitting the enemies. There's something missing in that, but there is this thing, you know, it's quite a gory game, and whenever you do it, you swipe an enemy, there's big sort of shoots of blood that go out, and the enemies, you can sort of slice the enemies in half and all this kind of stuff. But with that, there was a few bugs that I experienced as well. So say I was sort of battling an enemy, and I'd kill him, and you slice him in half. What would happen? I'd see the torso sort of appear in the distance and then drop to the floor, rather than where I just killed this enemy. It was a really odd bug. So I guess the torso was going back to the spawn point of the enemy rather than where you were killing him. So yeah, I'd say the actual enemy models and everything are very, very good. Some of the animations are probably a bit janky, but overall I was pretty impressed with this. And as I say, right back to the beginning, it's a step up from Deadly Hunter to me. This game has something extra about it that if you like that game, I think you'll get a lot out of this. And one final thing, it's actually free to play, so you can give this a try. It's free to give it a go. But yeah, I don't know if any of you guys have tried this one. I
have not tried it, but I'll just say, just from my impressions of Deadly Hunter, the developer is indie, but is very talented. Like the amount of work that they are able to put out as an indie developer and crank the fidelity of these types of games suggests that they must have like some other type of career where they're making a lot of money and don't want to be in professional game development. But I would think that that they could land at Epic or land somewhere, because like if this is one person cranking this out, or even 2 or 3 people, I'm not sure. They're doing very well. This is like some of the more polished graphically and everything that a lot of indie games are out there. So I just want to throw that tidbit out there. I don't know if they'll be listening to this episode or not, but you seem talented enough to me that you can go play with the big boys. Yeah, the developer is called Lighting Interactive. That's Leiting Interactive. So yeah, they seem to be going about this VR stuff in the right way, and they're doing enough to differentiate themselves from other people that are doing very similar games, but they just seem to have a slight edge in certain areas, I think. Anthony, did you try this one?
No, I didn't try this one. The developer is a Chinese developer, and I don't know that it's just like a 2 or 3 man team. It could be like a 20-man team. But what I was going to say is, like, they made Deadly Hunter free, and then they've made this one free as well. I wonder if in the Chinese market, like Viveport or whatever store is over there, you know what I mean? Maybe this is a game that they are charging money for and they're making money. And maybe just when they're bringing it to like the USA version of Steam and stuff, like they experimented with Deadly Hunter, maybe they got a lot of people refunding it, and so they were just like, let's just make it free. And then now they're making this one free as well. So it could be one of those things where they're kind of like developing some good karma, basically, like with the community, kind of like, you know, we're continuing to work on this. You're going to see us continually, and maybe the next game that comes along will be $19.99, $29.99 or whatever, and it'll be a very polished affair, and they've kind of built up a goodwill among the community, and so it could be something like that.
Yeah, so I guess the reason why I was thinking it was a single person, when they made Deadly Hunter free, they made a forum post, and the person's name on subreddit is Mugendon, Mugendon, but said that Deadly Hunter VR is a free game now. The reviews are mostly positive. My opinion, VR is an early stage, and then he said, so I just turned the game into a free game. So I guess it could be a larger team, and this person is just leading the team. But it really set the tone that it was to me was a very small team. And I just wanted to correct any misnomers. I didn't want to put something out there and be too far off base, but regardless, I think they do good work, and I can only imagine what they could do if they had some real AAA type funding behind them.
Yeah, I just wanted to say as well, because I thought this game was actually early access, but it isn't. So it probably makes some of the bugs a little bit less excusable. However, they are still working on it. They're still doing updates on this game. So hopefully they can sort some of that stuff out. But yeah, it's worth a try. It's free, so we can't complain too much.
Gary, quick question. You know, on Deadly Hunter, one of the things that I liked about that game was like the enemies were very different from, you know, your typical run-of-the-mill thing that you see a million times. And I just thought, well, as a Chinese developer, you know, they're drawing upon different fairy tales and things that they've grown up with, different kinds of magical creatures and stuff. Did you notice much of that with this new game, or how was that?
I'm very early on, but the enemies are actually very reminiscent of the ones that are in Deadly Hunter, to my recollection. You know, it's been a while since I played Deadly Hunter, but yeah, they seem very comparable to those. And they're sort of, again, I mentioned this at the beginning, this sense of scale, but the enemies are very big as well. So you feel quite powerful when you're taking these enemies down. And that aspect of it is quite satisfying. But yeah, there's something missing with the combat, something that you guys were talking about with Carnage Chronicles that I didn't really pick up on so much in that game, but I do in this. There doesn't feel too much weight behind your attacks. You know, when you're swinging the sword, you really do feel like you're swinging in empty space. And maybe that's something to do with they're not using the haptics quite right or something like that. However, I will say, when I'm using the bow and arrow in this game, and you also have this spear that you can throw, but the bow and arrow in particular is one of the better uses of haptics. Longbow, I've gone back to this again and again. You know, the in the lab, the longbow, it's got a very, very good use of haptics in that, and you really do get a sense that you're pulling this bow back. And this, to me, felt almost identical to longbow in that respect. So I think that's great, and it doesn't feel like that in a lot of these bow and arrow games. So that was another plus point for it. Okay, well, we can go over to Steve now. I think we can both talk about the game that you want to discuss anyway.
Yeah, so last week we talked about, right before we recorded the show, a mod for Alien Isolation was released by a Reddit member, and presumably members of other place, but Nibre, and it's up on GitHub, and so it's like we said, it's a mod for the game Alien Isolation, and it's very easy to install this mod. I don't think it gets any easier, but you download a very small size file. So if you're still on AOL dial-up, you can even do this mod easy. But you unzip it, and it's just a single file. You drop it into the game's installation directory, and it's now modded. And you launch it up, and I'll just say, you know, I've tried, I guess formally 3 mods now. Doom 3 BFG being the most popular. I tried the ukulele mod, and I've now tried this Alien Isolation mod, and they all work. And this mod though works really well. I won't say it's as good as the Doom 3 BFG mod, only because it doesn't have track motion controllers. But outside of that, Alien Isolation feels good, and it's a game that I'm excited to be able to play, because ever since picking up a VR, I've been reading that how good Alien Isolation was on the Oculus dev units, and a lot of people didn't understand why support for that would be broken. Like, why could we play this game on I guess it was the DK2 and not the CV1? And regardless, all of that's now behind us, because you can play it now, and it feels great. A few hours ago today, version 0.20 was released, and the developer of the mod is calling all of these pre-release. This isn't version 1 yet. This is version 0.x. And version 2 addressed a couple of things, but as of right now, there still isn't step turning, and I think that's probably one of the big key things people are looking for, is in order of the smooth rotation, you can have the pie chart / incremental. It's got all sorts of names of where it turns by a fixed rotation element. But anyways, I've been playing it now about, I I don't know, 45 minutes to an hour. And I think it's great. I'm starting to actually, it's starting, the atmosphere is starting to set. I've read and been in some discussions that it takes about an hour to get going before it puts its hooks into you. And I feel I'm getting closer to that part. Graphically, it looks very good in VR. Of course, Alien Isolation is now I didn't check, but it's several years old. I believe it came out during the early PS4, Xbox One days, somewhere around that time frame. I remember I'd rented it from GameFly very early in after getting a PS4. But anyways, and it didn't set its hooks into me. I didn't really give it much of a chance then, and I'm super glad because I now get to give it a chance in VR, which is a totally different experience. So it looks great, it plays great. The mod is very easy to install, so there's really no reason to not check this out. It's worth buying the game at this point. You can pick it up dirt cheap. I think you can buy it for about $10 now. So for what you're getting in terms of experience, as it sits right now, I am recommending it, and my assumption is that from this point, it's only going to get better. The Nibre, the person that's creating the mod, has said that he or they, I don't know, are hoping to get another or two updates out just this weekend. So hopefully the step rotation sets in, here in the next day or two by the time you're listening to this episode. And regardless, I think it's quite good. The atmosphere is awesome, and I still haven't come across the actual alien yet. So I'm still really looking forward to it.
It takes a while to get going, that part.
But I'm on the first ship you get stranded on, or I don't know if there's multiple ships that you get stranded on, but the Svetstopol, it's a very Swedish sounding name, so it's a very difficult name to pronounce. But you see that you're clearly stranded on there, and the ship has broken down, and very early on, once you get on there, you trigger, or you come across this gap in the flooring, and these flames are shooting up out of like an open gas valve or something, and the flames just look really good. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, damn, how does it look so good for a game this old that's just a mod? So I really don't have any complaints. I don't have any downside. There's some issues. I take that back. They're not issues. They're just little subtle things that are there because it is a mod, and because maybe not even because it's a mod. If Sega officially did this, maybe some of these same things would be present, but some of the text and the way some of the things are laid out isn't as ideal for VR because the game was never designed with VR in mind. So you have to go into it with that understanding that, like, when you access some of the terminals, it's going to put the terminal screen about 3 inches from your face, and it'll feel a little unnatural trying to focus on that text. There's a few things where your character will kind of fall, and anytime you fall in VR, when you're not physically falling to your floor, it'll feel a little bit jarring. But so far those have been very minor things, and I think they're worth putting up with to experience one of the best available VR experiences on the market right now.
Are you playing standing up?
I am playing sitting in a swivel, this chair here, and I swivel in it to do most of my turning, and it's working real well because I'll just turn and keep keep pushing up on the thumbstick. Whenever I want to do a 180 though, I don't want to do a physical 180, so I am in a lot of cases closing my eyes doing the turn because it can be jarring. But I will say, and I was talking to Gary before we started recording, that I have to think I have my VR legs. I put so many hours into VR, and I can handle thumb pad locomotion without issue. But smooth turning is one of those things that sometimes it gets me and sometimes it doesn't. The other day when I first booted this up and played maybe 20 minutes of it, the smooth turning wasn't sitting good with me. But today I had no issues with it, and I was doing 180s and wasn't really even turning much in my chair. So it's real coming or hit and miss. Like, I don't understand why it's not consistent. Maybe it deals with your diet or something. I don't know.
Is there a room scale? Is there any kind of room scale?
No, that's something I was going to mention as well, because you do get some positional tracking with this, but if you move too far out where you initiate the game, then it will sort of fade out to black. So there's no room scale in it, but you can stand up and you can turn on the spot, and that works pretty well. But one thing, Steve, that I want to mention that you've already mentioned actually is the terminals. For me, that's one of the main gripes I have about this mod at this stage. It's still early days, as you say, so I'm sure this will all get sorted out, but those terminals are there. They're about 3 inches away from your eyes, and when you're trying to focus in on the text of these terminals, you really can't. And that particular part, obviously, because when the game was originally made without VR in mind, you don't have any positional tracking. So if you back away from the terminal, it doesn't make any difference. The screen will follow you. So it's difficult to get past that for me. I think the mod works really well. I was very impressed with it, and I guess some of this is similar to how Resident Evil 7 would work on the PSVR, because I haven't played that, but maybe you can speak to that, Steve. Is it a comparable experience?
Yes, I would say Resident Evil 7 had a little more thought put into it. It doesn't have, like, you know, the terminal issue. Like when Capcom made Resident Evil 7, they knew they had a VR component, so they addressed most of those types of issues. But in that game, without getting into being real spoilery, but you'll have an enemy encounter, and that enemy will grab you from behind and turn you around and then like punch you. So that grabbing motion is one of those instances, and like grabbing you and spinning you around. So some people, I think, will have issues. They'll have motion sickness because of it. But for some reason, that didn't bother me in Resident Evil 7. So I think Capcom gave it special attention because they knew they had a VR component, and I think developers can put a little design decisions around that type of thing for any, I'd say, cross-platform type game going forward. If Capcom were to make the next Resident Evil, or if whomever is making a game now for the traditional gaming market that wants to also make it compatible with VR, I think they can get around most of those types of issues.
Some of those movements for me in playing through this mod, it really didn't bother me, you know, where you mentioned about how certain movements are automated, like if you fall down or if you're putting on a set of clothes or whatever. It really didn't bother me, that part of this, and I can live with that. And even if this game doesn't get any motion track controller support, I'd love it if it did, but even if it doesn't, that's fine. I think it's a good way to play it on the stick, the gamepad with analog sticks. The thing about the turning, yeah, I would like some snap turning in this, but I was playing because I saw this post somewhere, presumably on Reddit, where this guy was saying how he was setting the controller sensitivity on maximum and then literally just flicking it to the side, and it was so fast that it didn't really bother him doing it that way. And I tried it that way, and that worked pretty well. I've played this seated for a majority, but I thought because I knew Anthony would probably bring this up about standing, so I did try it, and it works really well. Yeah, you can play this game standing, no problem at all. If you press the 2 bumper buttons on the L1 and R1 on your controller, then it will reset your position. So if you're going from seated to standing, you can do that, and that works great. The cut scenes on this mod as well, they're sort of displayed on a huge screen, like a huge cinema screen in front of you. That works really well. Really doesn't take me out of the game too much.
And that's what Resident Evil 7 did. Any extended cutscene, it went into what we were calling the PlayStation's cinema mode, because it looked just the same, but it's basically a giant floating black screen. And I think that's a much better way to do it than the way the Doom 3 BFG did it, where you would just be standing in some weird slanted angle or whatever. So yeah, this mod's better than Doom 3 in that sense. But overall, it is now the game I'm going to. So when I get off of here, I hope to be able to play some games this afternoon, and I'm going into Alien Isolation. So that's where I'm at, and I haven't completed Lone Echo yet.
Yeah.
So
really?
Yeah. So and that's why I say that, because I think that speaks a lot of volume for is where I am, I guess, as a gamer and what I look for. I love Lone Echo, but there's something about the atmosphere and it being a mainstream experience, but also I know the Alien Covenant is being close to being available to watch in home. I know it's been out in theaters and all that, but I think it's close to coming out on Blu-ray, or maybe it did this week. So I'm hoping to have a whole lot of Alien kind of vibe between playing the game and watching the movie here soon and all that. I know you guys didn't like it too much, but I'm still gonna...
it's worth watching just to get the story, I guess. But one final thing I'll say about the mod is that sometimes, I don't know if you noticed this, Steve, but there is sometimes when you're turning, I get the sense that the camera isn't quite perfect at the moment in how it turns. Sometimes I feel like there's a very slight movement of turning. If you turn your head from side to side, you can get very slight sort of sideways movement. Not really that noticeable, really, but it's just something I noticed after playing.
It's like you're moving as you're spinning. It's like you're taking a quarter step to the opposite side from the way you're spinning.
Right. Yeah,
and I think that's a function, and I'll talk briefly on this because I know I've not talked about it on the show yet, but I think that's a function of a VR modded game where the headset is taking control over the camera, what would normally be just, mouse control or whatever, controlling the camera perspective in the game. I've tried, it's been several weeks now, but I bought VorpX maybe 7-8 weeks ago, and I know I haven't talked about it, but a lot of the VorpX games I tried BioShock Infinite, and they suffer from what you're describing, but to a much bigger degree. I could never get VorpX right, and I knew going into it that it was something you had to tinker with, and that it wasn't necessarily plug and play. Although the developer of VorpX, and they're pitching a little bit of a sales angle with this direct VR, where you download a game, you turn the VorpX hook on, and it just injects itself and sets everything right for you, and it does work. But there's something missing about VorpX that gives it that kind of bubbling effect that you're describing in the Alien Isolation mod, but much worse. The Alien Isolation mod's very, very subtle and very livable. In VorpX, I found it to be much more distracting. I just kind of wanted to touch on that. If someone hasn't played the AI mod, but has VorpX, that's sort of what we're talking about. And VorpX as a whole, I'll go ahead and just kind of briefly touch there. I personally don't like it and am not using it, and wish I could get my $40 back. But that's just me. I know a lot of people out there are big fans of VorpX and have had a good experience with it. I thought that might be me because if you followed the show or any of just my personal commentary, I've always been a fan of these gamepad games. Resident Evil 7, I almost mention every episode. Still my favorite game, so it doesn't bother me to plop my butt in a chair and grab a controller and play a game that way, which is very conducive to playing games with VorpX. The problem I had with VorpX is that I couldn't get it to look good. It was a big hassle, and it wasn't giving me, it doesn't feel as good as the Alien Isolation mod. It certainly didn't feel as good as Resident Evil 7, doesn't feel as good as Doom BFG. So it isn't just a way to play mainstream traditional games in VR. It is a way to do it, but doesn't do it as good as these mods do. So if you're a person that's kind of always fighting that VorpX bubble and whether or not to take the plunge, I can't help you. It's a very personal decision, a very difficult one. But if you find that your tastes are like mine, you may find that you don't like it, because I personally don't like it and would wish I could get my money back.
Yeah, I have been tempted by VorpX, but I've read a lot of stuff from people that have similar opinions to you, Steve. So it sort of prevents me from spending that amount of money just to try it out, really.
Yeah, and it's frustrating that there isn't a trial. You would think they could come up with like a 1-hour trial or something so that people could give it a go, because it's also very frustrating the way the DRM works. Like, so I bought VorpX and I have it on my machine still. I didn't go through the hassle of uninstalling it. But let's say next month I build a new computer and I want to install VorpX. I can't just enter a serial code for my receipt. I have to like email the guy and tell him, you know, I bought it on this day, and I guess the game gives you some sort of the application gives you some sort of code, and then he'll email you back your new registration key to reinstall it, and it's just a big hassle, and I just don't like the whole feeling around it, and I couldn't help myself from just being too curious to eventually take the plunge. But yeah, I'd rather have my money back and buy Serious Sam with it or something.
Okay.
There's another company. There's another thing called Tridef, TRIDEF VR, which recently came out, I think, for $20. It's kind of a similar thing.
Yeah, and I'm almost sure that I read that it's a $20 annual type thing with them. Yeah.
And also the people that tried it said that it really wasn't that great. So
yeah. So if anyone's watching this and you're like Nibre here and you know how to mod these games, please do a BioShock mod. Please. I really want BioShock because I didn't enjoy it in VorpX. Like that's kind of my dream right now.
And you know, Strauss Zelnick ain't gonna help us out. Hey, quick question for Gary though. So Gary, like I know that Steve is like immune to any horror in VR. Like he's done every horror thing in VR, and I don't think there's ever been anything that's like scared him to the point where it's like he can't play that. Like he just deals with it all. And Gary, I was wondering what your take is, because I'm pretty sure you don't own Brookhaven Experiment still. No. And I've always kind of wondered if maybe part of it was something about Brookhaven maybe freaked you out a little bit and you just didn't want to go down that road. And so my question was regarding this alien isolation, because I've always heard that the terror of hiding from this alien in VR is like maybe the most intense horror you will experience in VR, period. And so I was kind of curious about how that affected you.
Well, to be honest, because the build-up in this game is so long, you play for a long period of time before you even come across the alien. So I haven't got to that point yet. I have actually played this game. I picked this game up a couple of years ago and played probably 10, 12 hours on my PS4. So I know, I can't really remember it, but I do know roughly what happens in the game. But with regards to horror, yeah, it's not a comfortable feeling, but I've never had a VR experience where I've been unable to continue the horror game or anything like that. You know, I've never got to that point. The point on this game, though, because I mentioned last week, actually, when we briefly touched on this mod, my first modern day VR experience was using the DK2 and this game. And I was actually being chased by the alien when I tried it then. And, you know, I was in a busy retail store surrounded by people, so it didn't really affect me too much, but it was quite a visceral experience, as you'd expect with it being a first VR experience with this alien chasing you. And when it kills you in quite a gruesome way as well. So you had all that playing on it. But yeah, I'm looking forward to trying this, because a lot of people like you, Anthony, I've heard a lot of people mention that this is one of the most intense VR experiences. So I'm looking forward to getting to the point where the alien is.
And since you brought it up, yeah, I haven't seen the alien yet, so I don't know if this one is going to push me to my limit. But I will say that although I embrace horror, there have been two moments that have made me pretty damn close to noping out. I'm not noping out of it like, oh, I can't handle it. I'm noping out because it's just a little uncomfortable. And that was in a chair in the room. There's one particular section and it's completely psychological. You're just hearing sounds and you're in this storeroom, storage space, and you just see like a hand crawl out. It's nothing more than a hand, but there's all these trash bags on these shelves, and you're thinking at any moment there's like a creature in one of the bags, and it's going to pop out at you.
Oh, it's exactly the same.
And that creeped me the hell out, but I pushed through it. The other part in Resident Evil 7, that game didn't scare me. It's mostly kind of zombie, Walking Dead-ish type action than it is pure fear. But there is one part, and Anthony, I don't know if you ever got that far, but it's when you're in the section where you're dealing with the mom of the house, and after you deal with her, you deal with her twice, but after you deal with her the first time, you go through this section that involves a child, and anything like creepy dead children will like that part was very tense. Those two were very close to making me not push on, but I did. So I'm not impervious, I'm not invincible. I think I'm more tolerable than the average person, but I can only imagine this is year one, or whatever, of VR, year 1.5. What they're going to be able to do 5 years from now may take me past my threshold.
Okay. Well, I guess we can end the show there. Has anybody else got anything they want to quickly mention before we finish off?
I do not.
Okay.
I'll just say that Vindicta dropped their price in half. It was $30 and it went to 15. And I still think it's a great game. Although somebody was telling me they added a voice actor for the main guy and they think it's not good. So I need to fire it up again and see how it is.
Yeah.
But
okay.
$15, pretty good deal.
Hopefully it's the guy from Archangel. I can't talk. Archangel.
Yeah, that guy did a great job, man. And anybody that's playing Archangel, if you tried the female character, try the male, like start a new game, try the male character and see the difference. Or if you did try the male, try the female, because it's not that she does a bad job in any way. I tried it. She does a good job. Like if I had started playing as her, I don't think I would have I wouldn't have noticed anything, but it's just the male voice actor just did a really great job in an over-the-top cheesy kind of way, but I think it really adds a lot to it. And one thing I'll say about Archangel, we did not get a Steam version of that or anything like that. We played it on PlayStation VR, but a good friend of mine did pick up the Steam version, and he told me that he thinks this might be his number one go-to if someone's coming over to show them VR, because he was saying the graphics are fantastic.
Really? Let me try to figure out how to check it out on Steam.
One other thing as well for people that are interested, Battlezone as well is currently got a bit of a discount over here. It's £15, so it's tempting because I haven't played it. I think you've played the PSVR version, haven't you, Anthony?
Yeah, and I saw that the price, it's $20 US, and I was like, man, that is tempting, because I never completely finished it. I played it for a while. I had it on GameFly, and I sent it back, but I always wanted, like, I was having fun with the game. I liked it.
Yeah,
yep, I had it on GameFly too. I also liked it. I liked how it felt. I just didn't like the campaign implementation. But for $20, yeah, I might be tempted too on that one.
Okay. Well, anyway, that was VR Roundtable episode 47. Thanks for watching and listening to the show. If you can leave a review, and also if you get a moment, just please like the video on YouTube. That'd be great. But I guess that's everything. So we can you can see us next time. Next week, sorry, I should say.
All right. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Take it easy, guys.
Bye.